made you welcome to this earth. You made it a charnel house.
His low-budget movies became launching pads for Hollywood's hottest filmmakers.
Ouch! Ow! Dad! Stay back!
He revived the careers of legendary stars and gave future Hollywood legends their first break.
She gave me strict instructions that once I found you, not to let you out of my sight.
Don't do that, Rexford!
The Sci-Fi Channel looks inside the genius of Roger Corman, a master of fantasy.
Feed me milk. How vomitable.
What's it matter to you?
For more than 40 years, Roger Corman has been a force in the world of low-budget filmmaking. He's explored countless genres and even invented a few. And his films have inspired generations of moviegoers to pursue a career in film.
If everybody who ever worked for Roger Corman disappeared, out of the movie business, I think the industry would collapse. I mean, there's so many people.
Corman graduated from Stanford University in 1947 with an engineering degree. But what he really wanted to do was make movies. Ironically, it was the Stanford degree that kept him going as a struggling filmmaker in the early 1950s.
It may be my background in engineering, which taught me something about planning and organization and enabled me to learn the placement and movement of the camera, cutting techniques, and the technical end of it very quickly.
His ability to make films on shoestring budgets got Corman producing and directing assignments at American International Pictures. In the 1950s, AIP was the largest independent film company in Hollywood. Sam Arkoff was one of the company's founders.
Roger Corman was the only director we ever had that you never had to say, be economical. What you had to say with Roger is spend a little more money, get a few extras in the background, See, we did about 30 pictures with Roger.
Corman's films may have lacked the glossy veneer of big-budget studio projects, but they usually turned a profit. In fact, Corman titled his 1990 autobiography, How I Made 100 Movies in Hollywood and Never Lost a Dime.
I'm not certain I had an actual formula, but I had certain theories, and the first and most important was that the picture should be about something that was interesting. Once I had that, and I could develop a script that was interesting and had at least a reasonable amount of logic and character to it, I would then try to work as efficiently as I could to do a lot of pre-production planning, to bring in the best actors I possibly could, and it was simply working to the best of my ability.
Actress Beverly Garland worked on several of Corman's early films. In the sci-fi classic It Conquered the World, she confronts a carrot-shaped creature from Venus.
What was wonderful about Roger is that Roger not only was an incredible businessman, but he could do anything. I mean, if the cameraman dropped dead, he was behind the camera, We didn't waste a second. If the light fell down and something happened, he went and got the ladder and got it up, He could do anything on that set that went, sound, whatever, Roger could do it.
Though his special effects budgets were never more than a few $100s, Corman was able to lure Hollywood craftsmen like monster maker Paul Blaisdell to his projects. Film archivist Bob Burns was Blaisdell's assistant at the time.
Well, I can remember being on Roger's set. Everything was sort of fast and furious, as they say. I mean, because he would move, and would only retake a shot if something really went wrong. And normally it didn't go too wrong. He's really quite a good director, and he knows what he wants from the people, and he can get what he wants.
There was a great deal of creativity and thought, imagination went into those creatures. We were limited by our funds and by the techniques available, and sometimes when you're limited, your imagination takes you farther in order to conquer the problem. They really worked very well at the time.
You're gonna shoot me, don't shoot!
Corman's confidence grew with each sci-fi film he made. In the late 1950s, he began to experiment more and to push the limits of audience expectation.
I don't know who came up with the idea for black comedy. I might have. It might be an original idea of mine, but I'm sure somebody had done it before.
A Bucket of Blood, Little Shop of Horrors, and Creature from the Haunted Sea form a historic trilogy of Corman black comedies. All were shot in record time on minuscule budgets and are among those films most closely associated with the name Roger Corman.
Feed me!
I then kind of worked out some vague psychological theory, which I still believe in to a certain extent, that horror and humor and sex to a certain extent are very similar. In each case, you build up the tension, you build it up and up and up, and then you break it.
Boy, what I did.
And if you build it the right way and break it the right way, you get a scream from horror, you get a laugh from humor, and you get a lot of fun from sex.
No matter where you go or what you do or who you kill, I love you till the day I die.
Corman is probably fondest of Creature from the Haunted Sea because the ending so boldly defies Hollywood convention.
In all of these horror films, the people win. You kill the monster, you kill the creature from outer space. And I said to Chuck Griffith, the writer, on this one, Chuck, on this one, I want the monster to win. At the end of the picture, the monster kills every actor in the picture, and at the end, we see the monster smiling over the corpses of the people and with the golden treasure they were looking for.
Corman derived great satisfaction from the audience's reaction to the film's ending.
They actually gasped at the death of the last person in the picture, and then they laughed. Then they realized what I was doing.
Whatever consequences may follow your refusal to leave are upon you alone.
I simply wanted to make a classic horror story, and I had loved, ever since I had read it as a schoolboy, The Fall of the House of Usher. There was no thought about making a series of Edgar Allan Poe pictures. There was simply the desire to do The Fall of the House of Usher.
In 1960, Roger Corman convinced American International Pictures to back him on a classy, color version of Poe's enduring Gothic horror story. Budgeted at $270,000, Usher would prove to be AIP's biggest gamble to date. Corman spent a large portion of that money on his ideal lead for the film, Vincent Price.
What have you done? Give her to me.
When the film proved a success with critics and audiences alike, AIP encouraged Corman to make more films based on Poe's works.
They were a type of almost classical psychological horror that had not been done for many, many years. I can't say I was the first one to do them, but they hadn't been done maybe since the German Expressionists of the 1920s. So I think in there I brought a new look to horror films.
Director Joe Dante remembers the lasting impression the Poe films had on him as a movie buff growing up in New Jersey.
Roger had a real style. I mean, he liked to move the camera a lot, which was impressive. And even though sometimes the camera would nearly tip over and he wouldn't do another take, it was still a lot more fun than watching some of the big budget stuff that was coming out that was kind of heavy and elephantine.
Father, I...
Afraid, my dear? There's nothing to be afraid of.
Corman cast a who's who of veteran horror stars for 1963's The Raven. Boris Karloff, Vincent Price, and Peter Lorre all appear in this satire about dueling wizards and sorcerers. Corman then cast a young actor he had met in an acting class. Several years earlier, the director also had him play a masochistic dental patient in The Little Shop of Horrors.
Oh, my God, don't stop now!
I cast Jack Nicholson simply because I thought he was a good actor, and I knew from his improvisations in class that he could handle humor. He was a dramatic actor who could work with humor, and this was still a horror film, but it had humor in it. So I thought Jack would be able to bring both elements to it, and I didn't have to worry about star names because I had Vincent, Peter, and Boris.
Corman eventually made 8 Poe films. In addition to being well received in theaters, the so-called Poe cycle garnered widespread critical praise as well.
The Poe films definitely were beneficial to my career. I was doing nicely, I was commercially successful here, I was working all the time, but it wasn't until the Poe films that the American critics started to pick up on me because they may have been of a little bit higher quality.
In the 1960s, Roger Corman met two women who would play prominent roles in his life. Frances Dole, an Oxford-educated literature scholar who moved to America to work as his assistant, and Julie Halloran, now Julie Corman, a UCLA English major who became his personal and professional